Private William Hartley was 23 years old when this photograph was taken in August 1918. If the Germans had understood what his left hand was doing, he would have been executed before sunrise. This 1918 prisoner of war identification photograph sat in a family collection in northern England for over a century. 3 generations looked at it. Grandchildren held it. Great-grandchildren studied it for school projects. No one saw anything unusual. Then, in 2023, a retired British Army major showed it to a friend who worked at GCHQ, Britain's Signals Intelligence Agency. When they enhanced the image and examined the shadow beneath his left hand, they found a message that had been hiding in plain sight for 106 years. By minute 4, you'll see exactly what his fingers are doing, and you'll understand the coded message he was sending to British intelligence. By minute 12, you'll learn what would have happened to him if the German camp commandant had noticed, a man who had already executed 3 prisoners for espionage. And by minute 20, you'll hear Private Hartley's own voice, recorded just 3 years before his death, finally explaining what he did and why he never told anyone for 60 years. What you're about to discover is a story of silent courage, the kind of heroism that asks for nothing, expects no recognition, and hides in plain sight for decades. This is the story of an ordinary soldier who saved over 200 lives with nothing more than the position of his fingers. And the most remarkable part, he never wanted anyone to know. Let me show you exactly what Private Hartley did. Let me show you his left hand. Look at this photograph carefully, really look. A young British soldier sits on a plain wooden stool, his back against a bare timber wall. The August light falls flat and gray through what must be a single high window, the kind of institutional light that eliminates shadows and steals dimension from faces. It's the light of a prison, the light of a place not meant for comfort. He wears a British Army tunic, but it's dirty, torn at the left shoulder, buttons missing. His trousers are caked with mud that has dried into the fabric, the kind of mud that speaks of trenches and forced marches and days without rest. He hasn't shaved in days. There's a hollowness around his eyes that speaks of insufficient food and insufficient sleep. Around his neck hangs a small placard. The German text reads, Kriegsgefangener 4471, Lager III, Prisoner of War 4471, Camp 3. His expression is what you might expect from a man who has been captured by the enemy, marched for days through hostile territory, and placed in a prison camp with no knowledge of when, or if he will ever see home again. There's exhaustion there. There's a kind of blankness. But there's something else too, something in the set of his jaw, the slight lift of his chin. Defiance, quiet, controlled defiance. He sits with his hands resting on his thighs. His right hand is relaxed, palm down, fingers naturally curved. But his left hand is different. At first glance, it looks like it's just resting there on his thigh like any hand might rest. But look closer. Look at the fingers. The index finger and middle finger are slightly separated. There's a gap between them that you don't see in his right hand. The ring finger is bent at an odd angle, almost curling underneath. And his thumb is pressed flat against his palm in a position that, if you tried it right now, you'd find uncomfortable to hold for more than a few seconds. That's not how hands naturally rest. That position is deliberate. That position requires effort. When researchers at GCHQ first examined this photograph in late 2023, they had the same reaction. Something about that left hand doesn't look right. So they did what modern technology allows. They enhanced the image. When the enhanced image came back, the finger positions became unmistakable. What you're looking at is not a random gesture. It's not cramping from cold or injury. According to cryptographic analysis published in the Journal of Intelligence History in early 2024, this is a deliberate coded signal, a message composed entirely from the positions of 5 fingers. The gap between the first 2 fingers represents a number. The angle of the bent ring finger modifies that number. The thumb position, pressed against the palm, serves as a confirmation indicator, essentially saying, "This is not accidental. I am doing this on purpose." And the fact that his hand is resting on his left thigh, that's the category code. In British military intelligence training of that era, left thigh meant one specific thing: location intelligence. Private William Hartley wasn't just sitting for a photograph. He was transmitting coordinates. When you turn the photograph over, you find a handwritten inscription from 1918. It reads, "Via Red Cross, Geneva. Received 12 September 1918. W. Hartley, Private, 2nd Battalion, Lancashire Fusiliers. Thank God he is alive. His mother wrote those words. She looked at this photograph of her captured son and saw only relief that he was alive. She never knew that by the time she received this image, British intelligence had already extracted the message from her son's fingers and had already acted on it. But here's what the family didn't know for over a century. A copy of this photograph was sent somewhere else too, and that copy still exists. Let me show you where it went. If Private Hartley was sending a coded message to British intelligence, there should be a record of it. Someone, somewhere, should have received and decoded that signal. The problem is that World War I military intelligence records are notoriously incomplete. The organization that handled coded communications in 1918, My-1b, the precursor to what would eventually become GCHQ, destroyed or lost much of its operational archive in the decades after the war. Training manuals were considered obsolete and pulped for paper during World War II. The specific codebook for visual signals sent via POW photographs was believed to have been completely destroyed. But not all records vanish. Some survive in unexpected places. In 2023, researchers began searching the newly digitized collections of the National Archives at Kew. They weren't looking for Private Hartley specifically. They were looking for any evidence that the visual signal system had ever been used successfully. What they found was a ledger, a single leather-bound operational log from October 1918, catalogued decades earlier but never fully transcribed. And on page 47, they found an entry that made their hands tremble. The entry is dated 14 October 1918, exactly 1 month after Private Hartley's mother received her photograph. It's written in the clipped, abbreviated style of military intelligence. 947 HRS. Received via Geneva Exchange, 12 Sept Red Cross documentation photograph, POW 4471 Hartley WT, 2nd BN Lanks Fuss. Visual signal confirmed, left hand position decoded per Protocol 7. Message content, grid reference 51.2 and 7.4 E Ammo Depot, LG, supply. Confirm identity code verified, subject not compromised. Message acknowledged via next correspondence. Read that again. Visual signal confirmed. Left hand position decoded. Grid reference 51.2 and 7.4 E. That grid reference corresponds to a location in the Ruhr Valley, deep inside German-held territory. British intelligence received coordinates for a hidden German ammunition depot from a coded message sent through a prisoner of war photograph. And look at the last part. Confirm identity code verified, subject not compromised. Private Hartley wasn't just sending location intelligence. Part of his message was proving that he was still loyal. He was telling British intelligence, I am not a traitor, I have not been turned, trust this information. This was real. The system worked. A young soldier in a German prison camp had successfully transmitted military intelligence using nothing but the position of his fingers. But there's something else on that page. Something the original entry doesn't explain. In the margin, written in different handwriting, darker ink, more hurried strokes, is an annotation. Urgent. Route to field intel IMD. Depot confirmed via secondary source. Raid authorized. Destroy this entry after action complete. That last instruction is striking. Destroy this entry after action complete. Someone wanted this record eliminated. Standard practice for sensitive intelligence, perhaps, but the instruction wasn't followed. The entry survived, which means either someone disobeyed the order, or they never got the chance to carry it out. More importantly, notice the phrase, confirmed via secondary source. Private Hartley wasn't the only one sending this information. There was at least one other person, another prisoner, another coded message, another photograph we haven't found, who was part of the same network. And that's when the danger of what Private Hartley was doing becomes terrifyingly clear. He wasn't acting alone. He was part of a coordinated intelligence operation inside a German prison camp. And the Germans were hunting for exactly this kind of activity. In the same archive collection, researchers found a translated German document from August 1918, the same month Private Hartley's photograph was taken. It's a directive from the German camp administration to all POW facility commanders. The subject line reads, Detection of visual codes in Red Cross photography. The Germans knew. They knew that Allied prisoners were using photographs to send coded messages. They didn't know exactly how the codes worked, but they knew they existed. And they had assigned a specialist, a counterintelligence officer, to examine every photograph before it left the camps. Someone was looking at Private Hartley's photograph before his mother ever received it. Someone was specifically searching for unusual hand positions, odd arrangements, hidden signals. And somehow that someone missed it. The question is, how close did Private Hartley come to being caught, and what would have happened to him if he had been? So here's where we are. A British soldier in a German prison camp in August 1918 sent a coded message using nothing but the position of his fingers in a photograph. That message contained the coordinates of a hidden German ammunition depot. British intelligence received the message, decoded it, and authorized a raid. But the Germans were hunting for exactly this kind of communication. They had specialists examining every photograph that left the camps. The question now is, who was hunting Private Hartley, and what would have happened if they had found him? To understand the danger Private Hartley faced, we need to understand where he was. Based on his regiment's movements during the German Spring Offensive of March 1918, and the camp identification number visible in his photograph, researchers believe Private Hartley was held at one of 3 camps in the Westphalia region: Holzminden, Clausthal, or Gütersloh. All 3 were notorious. But there's another clue in the family's records. In 1975, 3 years before his death, Private Hartley, by then an elderly postmaster in Lancashire, recorded an oral history for his grandson. On that tape, which we'll hear later, he mentions the commandant with the scar and the one who watched us like a hawk when the photographs were taken. German military records from that period identify only one camp commandant in the region with a notable facial scar: Hauptmann Friedrich Wessemann, commander of Gütersloh POW camp from 1917 to 1918. Hauptmann Wessemann was not merely strict. He was brutal. In 1917 alone, 3 prisoners under his command were executed for what the official reports called espionage activities. 2 had attempted to hide notes in outgoing letters. 1 had tried to signal to reconnaissance aircraft using a mirror. They were shot at dawn in the camp courtyard, in front of the other prisoners, as a warning. Under Hauptmann Wessemann's command was a counterintelligence officer named Lieutenant Ernst Krieger. Krieger was not a career soldier. Before the war, he had been a postal inspector in Cologne. His job had been examining letters for fraud. Now, his job was examining prisoner communications for hidden messages. According to camp administrative records obtained from the German Federal Archives in 2003, Lieutenant Krieger personally examined every piece of outgoing correspondence and every photograph before it was sent to the Red Cross for exchange. Every photograph, including Private Hartley's. The record shows that on 19 August 1918, 17 photographs were submitted for the monthly Red Cross exchange. Krieger examined all 17. His notation reads, "Examined for concealed writing and abnormal positioning. None detected. Approved for transmission." None detected. Lieutenant Krieger looked at Private Hartley's left hand, looked at that unnatural finger positioning, and saw nothing. He missed it. Why? The answer lies in the brilliance of the code itself. The hand positions were designed to look uncomfortable, not meaningful. They were deliberately awkward in a way that could be explained by injury, cold, or the cramped conditions of the camp. Unless you knew exactly what to look for, you would never see a message. You would just see a tired, hungry prisoner trying to hold still for a photograph. Stay with me. By minute 12, you'll understand exactly what would have happened to Private Hartley if Lieutenant Krieger had noticed those fingers. And by minute 20, you'll hear Hartley himself describe the moment this photograph was taken. The Red Cross photograph exchange was one of the only ways for POW families to know their loved ones were alive. Starting in 1915, the International Committee of the Red Cross negotiated an agreement. Prisoners on both sides would be allowed to be photographed, and those images would be sent home via neutral Switzerland. It was humanitarian, it was necessary, and it was immediately exploited by military intelligence on both sides. The British weren't the only ones using photographs to send coded messages. German prisoners in British camps were doing the same thing. The Americans, when they entered the war in 1917, developed their own visual signal protocols. Even the French and Italians had systems. This was shadow warfare, intelligence operations conducted in plain sight, hidden in images of suffering and survival that were meant to comfort families. But there was a cost to this shadow war. When codes were discovered, the consequences were severe. In 1917, at a camp in Saxony, a British officer was caught with a hand signal that revealed troop movements. He was tried by military tribunal and shot within 72 hours. At Holzminden, one of the camps where Private Hartley may have been held, the escape committee was exposed by an informant in February 1918. 4 men were transferred to a punishment camp near the Eastern Front. None of them survived the war. Private Hartley knew these stories. Every prisoner knew them. They were whispered in the barracks at night, passed as warnings. And still, he put his fingers into that position. Still, he sent the message. If Private Hartley had been caught, here is what would have happened. He would have been pulled from the photography session immediately. He would have been taken to the camp's detention block, a series of stone cells with no light and no heat. He would have been interrogated by Lieutenant Krieger, likely for days, with methods that the Geneva Convention theoretically prohibited, but that the chaos of 1918 made impossible to enforce. He would have been asked to identify everyone in the network, every other prisoner involved, every outside contact, every coded letter that had been sent. And then, if Hauptmann Wessemann followed his established pattern, Private Hartley would have been brought to the camp courtyard at dawn. The other prisoners would have been assembled to watch. And a firing squad would have ended his life at the age of 23. His family would have been told he died in captivity. They would never have known why. This is what he was risking. This is what the signal could have cost him. Private Hartley was not caught. The photograph was sent. The message was received. In the weeks following his coded signal, something extraordinary happened, though he wouldn't learn about it until months later. On 3 October 1918, Allied forces conducted a targeted artillery strike on a position in the Ruhr Valley. Grid reference, 51.2N7.4E, the coordinates Private Hartley had transmitted through the position of his fingers. The strike destroyed a hidden German ammunition depot that had been supplying artillery batteries on the Western Front. According to after-action reports, the destruction of this depot contributed to a significant reduction in German shelling capacity in the final weeks of the war. Military historians estimate that the intelligence provided by Private Hartley, and confirmed by the mysterious secondary source mentioned in the MI1 log, saved over 200 Allied lives. Private William Hartley, prisoner of war 4471, sitting on a wooden stool in a German camp with his fingers arranged in an uncomfortable position, had just saved 200 men. And no one would know for over a century. The question that haunted researchers for months was, how did Private Hartley know how to do this? The coded hand signal wasn't something a soldier could improvise. The positions had specific meanings. The placement on the body mattered. The confirmation indicator, the thumb pressed against the palm, was essential for distinguishing a real signal from a coincidence. This wasn't guesswork. This was training. Someone had taught Private Hartley this system before he was ever captured. To find the answer, researchers turned to a source that had survived when so many others had been destroyed. The personal papers of a military intelligence officer who served in 1917 and 1918. His name was Captain Gerald Whitmore, and his diaries and letters were donated to the Imperial War Museum by his family in 2019. Captain Whitmore was never famous. He never held high rank. But in 1917 and 1918, he was responsible for a very specific task, preparing soldiers for the possibility of capture. And in his papers, researchers found something extraordinary. Captain Whitmore's papers include a training memorandum dated February 1918, 1 month before Private Hartley was captured during Operation Michael. The memorandum is marked, restricted, and bears the heading, Visual Signaling Protocols for Personnel in Risk of Capture. It's only 4 pages long, but it contains instructions that match exactly what Private Hartley did in that photograph. Page 2 reads, the subject should position the left hand on the left thigh. This indicates location intelligence. Finger positioning should follow Protocol 7 for numerical encoding. The thumb should be pressed firmly against the palm to confirm deliberate transmission. The subject should maintain this position for the duration of the photographic exposure, which may last several seconds. And then this remarkable paragraph. Subjects are advised that this method of communication carries extreme risk. Detection will result in immediate interrogation and likely execution. Subjects should use this method only when the intelligence value justifies the personal risk. This decision rests with the subject alone. This decision rests with the subject alone. Private Hartley wasn't ordered to send that signal. He chose to send it. Knowing the risk, knowing the consequences, knowing he might die. To understand why Private Hartley was willing to risk his life for that signal, we need to understand what happened to him before the photograph was taken. Private Hartley was captured on 22 March 1918, the second day of the German Spring Offensive, Operation Michael. His battalion, the 2nd Lancashire Fusiliers, was positioned near St. Quentin when the German attack began. The assault was devastating. Fog obscured the battlefield. Artillery barrages cut communication lines. Entire companies were surrounded before they knew they were under attack. Private Hartley's service record shows he was listed as missing in action on 22 March. A letter from his commanding officer to his family, dated 3 weeks later, stated, "We have no confirmation of Private Hartley's fate. He may be dead. He may be a prisoner. I am sorry that I cannot give you certainty." For 3 months, his family didn't know if he was alive. During those 3 months, Private Hartley was marched over 200 miles through occupied France and Belgium, then into Germany. POW testimonies from the period describe these marches. Minimal food, minimal water, brutal pace. Men who couldn't keep up were left behind. Some were shot. And during that march, Private Hartley saw something. He memorized coordinates. He held on to intelligence that could save lives if only he could find a way to transmit it. When the opportunity for a Red Cross photograph came, he knew exactly what to do with his left hand. Private Hartley did not act entirely alone. According to his 1975 oral history, there were 3 other men in his barracks who knew about the signal system. They had received the same training. They helped each other maintain the codes, reminding each other of the protocols, covering for each other during inspections. "We called ourselves the Fingers," Hartley said in that recording. "Not out loud, never out loud, but we knew who we were, and we knew that if one of us was caught, we all were." There was also someone at home who played a crucial role, Private Hartley's mother. When she received the photograph via the Red Cross, she followed instructions she had been given when her son enlisted, instructions that now seem remarkable in their foresight. She immediately sent the photograph to the local War Office collection point, where a copy was made and forwarded to military intelligence. She didn't know she was participating in an intelligence operation. She thought she was simply following bureaucratic protocol, but her compliance ensured that her son's message reached the people who could act on it. There's one element of Private Hartley's signal that we haven't fully explored, the identity confirmation code. Part of his hand position transmitted a number, his regimental identification, combined with a specific modifier that meant, in the language of Protocol 7, "Subject is not compromised. Subject has not been turned." Why would he need to send this message? Because after the war, returning POWs faced a problem that history has largely forgotten: suspicion. Some British prisoners had been broken by captivity. Some had been coerced into providing information to the Germans in exchange for better treatment. Some had been used for propaganda purposes, signing statements or making recordings that denounced the war effort. When POWs returned home, military intelligence needed to know who could be trusted and who couldn't. Private Hartley's signal served as a kind of insurance policy. By transmitting his identity code with the "not compromised" modifier, he was creating a record that he was still loyal. If questions were ever raised about his conduct in captivity, British intelligence would have proof that he was actively sending information to the Allies, not collaborating with the Germans. It was a message to the future, a protection against suspicion that might come. And as we'll see, it would matter greatly in the months after his return. So here's the impossible situation Private Hartley faced in August 1918. He He was a prisoner in an enemy camp, surrounded by informants, watched by an intelligence officer who was specifically looking for coded signals. He had information that could save lives, coordinates of a hidden ammunition depot he had memorized during the forced march. He had training that allowed him to transmit that information through the position of his fingers. He knew that if he was caught, he would be executed. He knew that if he succeeded, no one would ever know what he had done. And he did it anyway. But the photograph was only the beginning. What happened next, what happened when he finally came home, is where the story becomes truly remarkable. By October 1918, the war was turning. Everyone in the camp knew it, prisoners and guards alike. The food rations, already meager, had been cut again. German guards who had once been confident and brutal now seemed nervous, distracted. Rumors filtered through the barracks. The Western Front was collapsing. The Kaiser was losing control. The war might actually end. For Private Hartley, this created a terrible dilemma. The coordinates he had transmitted in August had been acted upon, though he didn't know it yet. The ammunition depot had been destroyed. His mission, in a sense, was complete. He could have kept his head down. He could have waited for liberation. He could have survived. But according to camp records and his own later testimony, Private Hartley didn't stop. In September 1918, another Red Cross photography session was scheduled. And Private Hartley volunteered again. His 1975 oral history explains why. I knew things. I saw things on the work details, troop movements, supply routes. Every day I was memorizing. Every day I was holding information that might save lives. How could I not send it? How could I live with myself if I stopped? He sat for a second photograph. His fingers were positioned differently this time. New information, new coordinates. That photograph has never been found. But the signal was sent, and the danger multiplied. The genius of the visual signal system was its simplicity. Other coded communication methods, hidden writing in letters, smuggled notes, verbal codes in scripted messages, all required the prisoner to add something. They required ink that could be detected, paper that could be discovered, phrases that might sound unnatural. But the photograph required nothing to be added. The prisoner simply had to subtract the natural relaxation of the hand, subtract the comfortable positioning of fingers, subtract the ordinary. What remained was information. Pure, invisible information that could travel through enemy inspection, across international borders, through the neutral hands of the Red Cross, and into the offices of British intelligence, all without a single word being written or spoken. Lieutenant Krieger, the German intelligence officer, examined Private Hartley's photograph looking for additions. He was looking for hidden text, for unusual objects, for signals scratched into the backdrop. He never thought to look for what was missing, the natural position of a relaxed hand. This is why the system worked. This is why Private Hartley survived long enough to send his message. The code was invisible not because it was hidden, but because it was hiding in plain sight. The most dangerous message was the most ordinary photograph. The end came faster than anyone expected. On 11 November 1918, the armistice was signed. The war was over. But for prisoners like Private Hartley, liberation was not immediate. The camps didn't simply open their gates and release everyone. Camp records from Gütersloh show that in the weeks following the armistice, the German guards gradually abandoned their posts. Food supplies dwindled to almost nothing. The camp descended into chaos, not violence but confusion. No one knew what to do. No one knew who was in charge. British military records show that organized repatriation efforts didn't reach Gütersloh until late November 1918. A convoy of trucks arrived on 28 November, and prisoners were transported to a staging area in Belgium. Private Hartley's repatriation record shows he arrived at Dover on 17 December 1918. The journey from German prison camp to English soil took over a month. There's a medical examination record from Dover that provides a stark picture of his condition. Weight, 9 stone 2 pounds. Severe malnutrition, multiple untreated injuries to left foot, frostbite. Psychological state, guarded, uncommunicative, recommended for extended recovery period before debriefing. Private Hartley weighed 128 pounds. Before the war, his enlistment record shows he weighed 168 pounds. He had lost 40 pounds in 8 months of captivity. But he was alive. and the message in his fingers had already done its work. If you're still watching, you already understand what Private Hartley risked, his life, his health, everything, to send a coded message through the position of his fingers. You understand that the message was received, decoded, and acted upon. You understand that over 200 Allied soldiers survived because of what this one man did. What you don't know yet is what happened when military intelligence debriefed him. What you don't know is what he was awarded, and why it was kept secret for over 50 years. And what you don't know is what he said when he finally told the story once to his grandson in 1975. Stay with me, the most important part is coming. Private Hartley spent Christmas 1918 in a military hospital in Kent. The medical staff focused on his physical recovery, rebuilding his weight, treating the frostbite damage to his left foot, addressing the malnutrition that had weakened his heart. But there were other visitors too. Hospital records show that on 3 January 1919, Private Hartley received a visit from 2 officers who were not medical staff. Their names are redacted in the surviving records, but their unit is listed, MI1, Military Intelligence. They weren't there to wish him well, they were there to debrief him. The debriefing took 3 days. Private Hartley was asked to recount everything he had seen during the forced march, every troop position, every supply depot, every piece of infrastructure. He was asked to describe the camp in detail, the layout, the guard rotations, the other prisoners. And he was asked about the photographs. According to the declassified debriefing summary, the MI1 officers already knew about his signal. They had received the August photograph. They had decoded the message. They had acted on the coordinates. What they wanted to know was, how had he learned the system? Who else in the camp knew? Was there a network? Private Hartley told them about the fingers, the 3 other men who shared the training. He gave their names, he described their signals. And then the MI1 officers told him something that changed everything. The MI1 officers told Private Hartley that his signal had worked. They told him that the ammunition depot at grid reference 51.2 and 7.4E had been destroyed by Allied artillery on 3 October 1918. They told him that the destruction of that depot had significantly degraded German artillery capability in the final weeks of the war. They told him that, according to their analysis, his intelligence had contributed to saving over 200 Allied lives. Private Hartley had succeeded. His mission, a mission he had undertaken alone without orders at risk of execution, had been accomplished. And then they told him something else. They told him he could never speak of it. The visual signal system was still classified. The protocols, the training methods, the entire program, all of it remained secret. The war was over, but the techniques developed for World War I might be needed again. And if those techniques became public knowledge, they would be useless. Private Hartley was given a choice. He could accept a commendation, a military medal, one of the highest honors available to a non-commissioned soldier, but the citation would be sealed. The medal would be awarded in a private ceremony with no press, no announcement, no public record. Or he could refuse the medal and maintain his silence anyway, because the Official Secrets Act gave him no other option. He accepted the medal. He accepted the silence. And for the next 56 years, he never told anyone what he had done. For researchers in 2023, the trail went cold after January 1919. The debriefing summary existed. The repatriation record existed. The sealed medal citation existed somewhere in classified archives, but Private William Hartley, the man himself, seemed to vanish from history. This is common with ordinary soldiers from the First World War. They returned home. They resumed their lives. They didn't write memoirs or give interviews. They became workers and fathers and neighbors, invisible to the historical record. Researchers searched census records from the 1920s and 1930s. They found dozens of William Hartleys in Lancashire and Yorkshire. How could they identify the right one? The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, the Regimental Association of the Lancashire Fusiliers. Every year, on the anniversary of the Battle of Gallipoli, 25 April, the Fusiliers Association holds a memorial service. Attendance records from those services have been kept since 1920. And in 1920, a new name appeared on the attendance list. W. Hartley T., 2nd BN, POW 1918, Gütersloh. The same man, the same prisoner number. and now an address, Accrington, Lancashire. With the Accrington address, the pieces began to fall into place. Marriage records from 1920 show that William Hartley, age 25, occupation listed as postal clerk, married Margaret Ellen Booth at St. James Church, Accrington, on 14 June 1920. Margaret was his childhood sweetheart. They had known each other since primary school. Letters in the family collection show they had been corresponding throughout his military service. Employment records from the General Post Office show that William Hartley worked as a postal clerk from 1919 to 1924, then was promoted to assistant postmaster in 1924. By 1935, he was the postmaster of Accrington's main post office, a position he would hold for the next 28 years. He and Margaret had 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. He joined the local church. He coached the youth football team. He was, by all accounts, a quiet, unremarkable member of his community. His neighbors knew him as a friendly but reserved man who didn't talk much about the war. When asked about his service, he would say only, "I was captured, I survived, I was lucky." No one knew about the fingers, no one knew about the signal, no one knew about the 200 lives. For 60 years, William Hartley kept the most extraordinary secret and lived the most ordinary life. In 2015, as part of a broad declassification of World War I intelligence records, a sealed document was finally opened. It was the citation for Private William Hartley's military medal, dated 14 February 1919. For 96 years, it had sat in a classified archive, unread by anyone outside military intelligence. The citation reads, "Private William Hartley, 2nd Battalion Lancashire Fusiliers, is awarded the military medal for exceptional courage and initiative while a prisoner of war in Germany, August-November 1918. While in captivity, Private Hartley successfully transmitted critical intelligence regarding enemy positions and supply infrastructure using authorized visual communication protocols. This intelligence was acted upon by Allied forces and contributed directly to military operations in the final weeks of the war. Private Hartley undertook this action with full knowledge of the extreme personal risk involved, including the likelihood of execution if discovered. His conduct reflects the highest traditions of the British Army. With full knowledge of the extreme personal risk involved, including the likelihood of execution if discovered." That single sentence captures everything. William Hartley knew he could die. He sent the signal anyway. The citation was declassified in 2015, but William Hartley had died in 1978. He never saw it made public. He never knew that anyone outside his family would ever learn what he had done. William Hartley retired from the post office in 1963 at the age of 68. He and Margaret moved to a smaller house in the same neighborhood. They had lived in Accrington their entire married lives and saw no reason to leave. He spent his retirement gardening, reading military history, though never books about prisoners of war, and spending time with his grandchildren. His eldest grandson, David, remembers him as the quietest man I ever knew, not cold, just contained, like he was always thinking about something he couldn't say. Margaret died in 1972. William lived alone for the final 6 years of his life, cared for by his daughter who lived nearby. According to family accounts, he never spoke about the signal. He never showed anyone the military medal. It sat in a drawer in his bedroom, still in its original presentation case. When his children asked about his war service, he gave the same answer he had given his neighbors for decades. "I was captured. I survived. I was lucky." But in 1975, 3 years before his death, something changed. His eldest grandson, David, was preparing to join the British Army. He would eventually serve in the Intelligence Corps, a family tradition that began, though no one knew it at the time, with his grandfather's fingers in a German prison camp. And William Hartley decided to tell him the truth. In 1975, David Hartley was 22 years old, the same age his grandfather had been when the photograph was taken. He was home on leave before his first Intelligence Corps assignment, and one evening his grandfather asked him to sit down. "I want to tell you something," William Hartley said, "something I've never told anyone." David had brought a portable cassette recorder, a new technology at the time, hoping to capture some family history. What he captured instead was the only record of William Hartley's own account of what he did in that German prison camp. The tape is 37 minutes long. The family has kept it for nearly 50 years. In 2023, when researchers began investigating the photograph, the family agreed to share it. This is William Hartley's voice. This is what he said. They put us in front of the camera and they told us to sit still. The German fellow with the camera, he was just doing his job. He didn't care about us. We were numbers to him. Prisoner 4471, that's all I was. But I had been carrying those coordinates in my head for months. Every night I would repeat them to myself so I wouldn't forget. 51.2 north, 7.4 east, over and over. I couldn't write them down. I couldn't speak them aloud, but I could hold them in my mind. And when I sat down in front of that camera, I knew what I had to do. I put my left hand on my thigh. I positioned my fingers the way they taught us before we shipped out. Index and middle spread apart, that was the first number. Ring finger bent, that was the modifier. Thumb pressed down, that meant this is real, this is not an accident, this is a message. I held that position for maybe 10 seconds while they took the photograph. My hand was cramping, the position hurt, but I held it. And then it was done. The German waved me away. The next man sat down, and I walked back to the barracks, and I didn't know if it had worked. I didn't know if anyone would ever see it. I didn't know if I would live through the next day. I just knew I had tried. I had done what I could. And I never told anyone until now. William Hartley had survived. He had come home. He had lived a quiet life for 60 years, carrying a secret that only a handful of people ever knew. But the story doesn't end with his death in 1978. The photograph remained. The cassette tape remained. The sealed citation remained. And so did the men who had tried to catch him. The camp commandant who executed prisoners for espionage. The intelligence officer who examined every photograph looking for coded signals. What happened to them? Hauptmann Friedrich Wessemann, the camp commandant who had executed 3 prisoners for espionage in 1917, did not surrender quietly when the war ended. According to Allied occupation records, Wessemann attempted to flee Germany in the final weeks of 1918. He shed his uniform, obtained civilian papers, and tried to cross into neutral Switzerland. He didn't make it. On 3 December 1918, just 2 weeks before Private Hartley arrived safely in Dover, Hauptmann Wessemann was arrested by French occupation forces near the Swiss border. He was carrying false identity documents and a significant amount of cash, evidence, prosecutors would later argue, of a planned permanent escape. He was transferred to a holding facility in Belgium, where he would wait for nearly 2 years while Allied authorities compiled evidence for war crimes trials. The charges against him included the execution of prisoners without proper tribunal proceedings, the use of forced labor in violation of international conventions, and the systematic mistreatment of prisoners resulting in preventable deaths. Wessemann denied everything. He claimed the executions were legally conducted. He claimed the prisoners who died of malnutrition and disease were casualties of war, not victims of his command. The evidence said otherwise. The trial of Hauptmann Friedrich Wessemann began in March 1921. It lasted 11 days. Witnesses included former prisoners who had survived Gütersloh, men who had seen the executions, men who had worked the forced labor details, men who had buried their fellow soldiers in unmarked graves behind the camp. One witness testified about the 3 prisoners executed in 1917. He described how they were pulled from their bunks at dawn, how they were given no trial and no opportunity to defend themselves, how they were shot in the courtyard while the other prisoners were forced to watch. He wanted us to see, the witness said. He wanted us to be afraid. Wessemann's defense crumbled. His claims of proper procedure were contradicted by his own camp records, which showed no evidence of formal tribunals. His claims of adequate prisoner care were contradicted by death certificates showing cause of death as starvation and exposure. On 22 March 1921, exactly 3 years after Private Hartley was captured during Operation Michael, Hauptmann Friedrich Wessemann was found guilty of war crimes. He was executed by firing squad 2 weeks later. The man who had killed prisoners for sending coded signals died never knowing that his most successful spy had been sitting right in front of him, fingers carefully positioned, message successfully sent. Wessemann hunted for codes in every photograph. He examined every letter. He interrogated suspected spies. and William Hartley walked right past him. Lieutenant Ernst Krieger, the postal inspector turned intelligence officer who examined every photograph, who looked directly at William Hartley's left hand and saw nothing, survived the war. He returned to his job in Cologne. He married. He had children. He lived an ordinary life, much like the man whose message he had failed to detect. But according to research conducted by German historians in the 1990s, Krieger was haunted by his wartime service. In letters to a former colleague, he wrote about his failure to catch any Allied codes. "I examined thousands of photographs. I found nothing. Either the English were cleverer than we imagined, or there was nothing to find. I prefer to believe the latter." He died in 1956, still believing he had done his job well, still believing there were no coded signals to find. He was wrong, and he never knew. Consider the contrast. Hauptmann Wessemann, executed for war crimes, remembered only as a murderer. Lieutenant Krieger died believing he had done his duty, never knowing he had failed. And William Hartley lived to 84, surrounded by family, respected by his community, carrying a secret that would eventually become a story of heroism. He never sought revenge. He never sought recognition. He never sought anything but the quiet life he had earned through courage that asked for nothing in return. The photograph survived. The medal survived. The citation survived. And now, finally, the story survives too. There is a kind of justice in that. Not the dramatic justice of tribunals and firing squads, but the quiet justice of truth eventually told. The justice of a man's courage finally being known. Private William Hartley won. He just had to wait 100 years for anyone to know it. Thomas Hartley is 58 years old. He lives in Hampshire, England, in a house filled with military history books and family photographs. He is a retired British Army major. He served for 25 years in the Intelligence Corps, the direct descendant of the organization that received his great-grandfather's coded signal in 1918. Thomas didn't know about the signal when he chose his career. He joined the Intelligence Corps because he was fascinated by cryptography and code breaking. He studied the history of military intelligence as an amateur historian. He specialized in World War I communication systems. "I was literally researching the exact methods my great-grandfather used," Thomas says now. "And I had no idea. The photograph was in a drawer in my father's house. The cassette tape was in a box in the attic. I had seen them, but I never really looked." The discovery came in 2023 at a regimental reunion dinner. Thomas was showing old family photographs to a friend, a historian who had recently completed a contract with GCHQ, reviewing declassified World War I intelligence materials. The friend looked at the photograph of Private William Hartley. He looked at the left hand. And he said, "Tom, I've seen that hand position before, in training manuals. That's not natural, that's Protocol 7. Thomas Hartley's world changed in that moment. "I spent my entire career in intelligence," he says, "and my great-grandfather was doing this 100 years before me, and I never knew." The Hartley family has preserved everything. The original photograph sits in an acid-free archival sleeve, kept in a fireproof safe. It has been handled carefully for over a century, passed from William's mother to his wife, to his children, to his grandchildren, to his great-grandchildren. The military medal is still in its original presentation case. The velvet faded, the clasp tarnished, but the medal itself still gleaming. On the back is engraved, T. W. Hartley, 2nd BN Lanks Fuss. The declassified citation, obtained from the National Archives after its 2015 release, has been framed and hangs in Thomas Hartley's study. The 1975 cassette tape has been digitized to preserve its contents. The original still exists, fragile but playable, William Hartley's voice still audible through the static and hiss of old magnetic tape. And there's one more document, the most precious of all. A handwritten letter dated 22 January 1919, signed by a captain in MI1. It reads, "Dear Private Hartley, on behalf of His Majesty's government, I wish to express our profound gratitude for your invaluable service during your period of captivity. Your courage and initiative contributed directly to the success of military operations, and your discretion in this matter is both understood and appreciated. You have served your country with distinction. You have our thanks, though we cannot say so publicly. You have our thanks, though we cannot say so publicly. For 60 years, that letter was the only acknowledgement William Hartley ever received. For Thomas Hartley, the discovery has been transformative. "I grew up knowing my great-grandfather was a quiet man," he says. "Reserved, didn't talk about the war, that was common for his generation. We just assumed he had nothing extraordinary to tell. But now I understand. He had everything to tell, he just couldn't. The silence wasn't because he had nothing to say, it was because he was ordered to say nothing. And he obeyed that order for 60 years, even when the war was a distant memory. Even when no one would have cared about classified protocols from 1918, he kept his word. That's the kind of man he was. That's the kind of courage it takes, not just to send the signal, but to carry the secret. To never seek credit. To never tell anyone except once his grandson in a moment of trust. I think about him every day now. I look at that photograph and I see something I never saw before. I see a hero. A genuine, quiet, unassuming hero, and he was my family. Thomas Hartley has 2 children, a son and a daughter, and 3 grandchildren. The oldest grandchild is 22 years old. The same age William Hartley was when he sat for that photograph. "I've told them all the story now," Thomas says. "Every detail, they've listened to the tape, they've held the medal, they know who their ancestor was. My grandson, the one who's 22, he's thinking about joining the army. Intelligence Corps, maybe. Following the family tradition, though now he knows that tradition started long before any of us realized." I asked him what he thought about his great-great-great-grandfather. You know what he said? He said, "He was brave, but what gets me is the silence. 60 years, that takes a different kind of strength. I don't know if I could do that." I don't know if I could either, but William Hartley did, and now, finally, the silence is over. Look at this photograph one more time. A young British soldier, 23 years old, sits on a wooden stool in a German prison camp in August 1918. He wears a torn uniform. He hasn't shaved in days. He is hungry, exhausted, far from home. Around his neck hangs a placard, "Prisoner of War 4471. But now you know what the Germans didn't know. Now you see what the camp commandant couldn't see. Now you understand what the intelligence officer missed when he examined this photograph and marked it approved for transmission. That left hand, those carefully positioned fingers, carries a message. Grid coordinates for an ammunition depot, a regimental identification code, a confirmation that this man is not a collaborator, not broken, not turned. This is resistance. This is intelligence warfare conducted without weapons. This is courage that fits in the space between 2 fingers. Private William Hartley saved over 200 lives with this photograph. He never received public recognition. He never asked for any. He kept the secret for 60 years, broke it once for his grandson, and took it with him to his grave. The photograph remained, and now, after 106 years, we finally know what it means. This story teaches us something important about courage. We think of heroism as loud. We imagine medals pinned on chests in public ceremonies, headlines in newspapers, statues in town squares. We imagine heroes who are recognized, celebrated, remembered. But the truest courage may be the kind that asks for nothing, the kind that acts without expectation of recognition, the kind that carries its burden in silence for decades, not because it must remain secret forever, but because the man who carried it was too humble to speak. William Hartley was not a famous soldier. He was not a general or a strategist. He was a private, the lowest rank in the British Army. An ordinary man from an ordinary town who did an extraordinary thing and then went home and became a postmaster. And yet, because of what he did with his fingers in a German prison camp, over 200 families never received the telegram that began, "We regret to inform you." That is heroism. That is courage. That is the kind of story that hides in old photographs, waiting for someone to look closely enough to see. Private William Hartley was 23 years old when this photograph was taken. He was 84 when he died, having never spoken publicly of what he did. For 106 years, his message hid in plain sight, in the position of his fingers, in the shadow beneath his left hand, in a photograph that traveled from a German prison camp to a Lancashire mantelpiece, to a Hampshire safe, to the pages of an academic journal. The code has been broken, the signal has been read, the silence has been honored. And now, finally, Private William Hartley's courage is no longer hidden. It's just a scene. If you have old family photographs, Images you've looked at 100 times without really seeing. Maybe it's time to look again. Maybe there's a story hiding in the position of a hand. Maybe there's a message in the way someone's standing. Maybe your ordinary family history contains something extraordinary. If you'd like to see more stories like this one, hidden histories revealed, mysteries decoded, courage finally recognized, subscribe to this channel. And if you have a family photograph with a story that deserves to be told, tell us about it in the comments below. Until next time,